My dearest brothers and sisters. This is Hakann speaking. I greet you in peace and love. Us Pleiadians have practically zero laws. We do have judges. However, our judges moderate disputes and deliver consequences based not on a law book, but rather on their own wisdom, on what their soul says and on guidance from higher consciousness beings. Normal citizens are allowed to look over the shoulder of a judge, and if people don't think that a judge delivers good judgments, then that judge is replaced. If a society has access to high consciousness judges, then I think our system is substantially better than your system of having judges who are there to enforce a written down law book. However, if a society does not yet have access to these high consciousness judges, then you do need a law book. A low consciousness judge who just rules as he or she wishes, unbound by a law book, obviously can lead to horrible outcomes. Right now you're in an uncomfortable gray zone where enforcing a book of laws doesn't quite work, however you also don't quite have high consciousness judges yet. Right now it may be too early to abolish nearly all laws. Still, the consciousness on your world is rising rapidly, and so you may relatively soon have those high consciousness judges. The rule of law was a great step forward at a lower level of consciousness. Still, let's examine the downsides of the rule of law. One problem with laws is that they make some things legal that clearly shouldn't be allowed. Think about companies destroying nature, companies poisoning the citizenry, companies bribing their oversight, regulatory capture, companies writing their own laws, companies creating quasi-monopolies, companies and billionaires avoiding taxes, billionaires bribing politicians, etc. Another problem with laws is that there are cases where they criminalize good things. For example, George Washington was literally a traitor according to the law. And while it's not the primary reason, one factor why your gray hats are taking so long to take action is that they're mostly trying to follow the law. So the law is tying the hands of the gray hats to an extent and is delaying their actions, while the law isn't hindering the dark controllers at all because at critical times they simply don't follow it. So laws can hinder good people in their efforts to stop bad people. You could argue, well, laws stop bad people too, but a judge without a law book can just as easily hold a criminal accountable as a judge with a law book can. Sure, a law book can prevent a judge from becoming tyrannical or arbitrary, but recall that a requirement for our system is that we have high consciousness judges. Otherwise you do indeed need laws. Laws in general hinder good people, who obey them, but not bad people, who don't. And yes, sure, technically the solution to that is arrest lawbreakers, but that's much easier said than done, as you are seeing on your world. Even obvious crimes go unpunished, and there are also a whole lot of crimes that you never hear about that also go unpunished. Another downside of laws is that there are lots of things that are destructive or immoral, but they're technically legal, so a judge under a system of laws can't do anything about them. Suppose a lobbying organization gives money to a politician, and later that politician just happens to support a law that this lobbying organization likes. Well, without a law book, a judge could look into this and perhaps make these people face consequences. But because law books exist, judges can't do anything about this because this is technically legal. So because laws exist, bribery is effectively legal and judges can't do anything about it, so long as it's done in a slightly indirect way. Whereas if laws didn't exist, judges could just rule based on their own judgment and do something about this situation where people are clearly getting bribed but legally speaking they aren't. In other words, law books tie the hands of judges. It may be good to tie the hands of the judges in a low consciousness society, but it's not good to do so in a high consciousness society. Furthermore, if a law book makes a list of things that are illegal, then it also implicitly says that other things are legal, even if those things are immoral, corrupt or destructive. This, again, ties the hands of judges who want to hold people accountable. And it protects and gives cover to smart evildoers. Picture a healthcare company that puts out a medicine that actually makes people sicker. Imagine that researchers working for this healthcare company manipulated their clinical trials to get this medicine approved. And the researchers, the CEO and the company all make a killing off this, both in the sense that they kill people, and that they make huge amounts of money from this. In your law-based system, nothing can be done about this, because these people have all legally covered their backside. Legally speaking, they broke no law. At worst the company gets fined, but the researchers and the CEO keep their money, and even the company itself could be legally protected. So if you're an amoral CEO, why not put out poison disguised as medicine? After all, keeping people sick is a great business strategy. And if you put out 10 poisonous medicines and one later gets revealed, well, you face no consequences and probably your company faces no or at most light consequences. Now imagine a system without laws. One poisonous medicine gets revealed, and a judge finds out that the researchers manipulated its clinical trial. Now the judge sends those researchers and the CEO to jail, and forces the company to pay a huge amount of money to its victims. In a system without laws, the judge can just do this. Now suddenly all other healthcare researchers and CEOs are probably going to stop putting out poison, because they don't want to go to jail. Whereas in a law-based system, the existence of laws protected them from jail, so it was in their amoral self-interest to put out poison. So, laws actually protect clever criminals from prosecution. Clever criminals will make sure they're legally protected, and then harm millions or steal billions. And you can't hold them accountable because they didn't break the law. It's easy to say, well, just fix the laws then, but there will always be loopholes to exploit. And there will always be politicians who are bribed to write loopholes into the law. And you can't stop bribery of politicians because legally speaking they're not being bribed. They just happen to pass laws that happen to be exactly what their donors want. Pure coincidence, you see, you can't legally prove that it was bribery. And obviously it's in politicians' interest to get huge sums of money, so they're not going to pass laws that stop their cash flow. Even if they did, they'd find some other loophole. Because laws exist, your judges can't do anything against immoral, destructive, corrupt but technically legal actions. Yet another problem with laws is that over time, you'll get more and more and more laws. This makes life very difficult for normal people and for small companies. It limits freedom in the economy. And eventually the system just stops working because there are too many laws. Big companies actually often like it when there are lots of laws, because that means competitors can't realistically enter the market. And lots of laws may mean that normal people are forced to pay for the services of companies that can help them navigate these overly complex laws. Another problem is that in a system with laws, many of your smartest people spend their time thinking about how they can pervert and twist the law. Why? Because this is very lucrative for them personally. But of course it's not productive for society if your smartest people are spending their days thinking about how they can pervert and twist the law. Yet another problem with laws is that they prescribe that if someone commits this crime, they should spend that many years in prison. Well, 1. Jails often aren't the best place to make someone genuinely realize the damage they've done, motivate them to fix the damage and become productive members of society, and also give them the nourishment that they missed which caused them to do destructive things in the first place. Sometimes you do need to make people face the consequences of their actions, in order to help them progress in their soul growth. But throwing them in prison often isn't the best way to do that. There are ways to make people face consequences that aren't jail, or fines. Us galactics don't really have a concept of fairness or justice in the sense that we don't think that someone who does crime X should spend Y years in prison. If a person genuinely repents, genuinely understands the damage they've done and are working to repair that damage, then why would you throw them in jail? And if they're unrepentant, why let them loose on society just because an arbitrary number of years have passed? If you don't like the idea that we don't punish people who committed serious crimes but then genuinely repented and are now working for the light, well, Hakann, from earlier channelings, has committed enough crimes that an Earth human could easily argue that it would be justice to imprison him for life. But that's not how we do it. He genuinely repented and is working towards healing and helping others, and so he is free and has a place amongst us. Similarly, if a dark controller on your world were to genuinely repent and start working for the light, then from our perspective that should be allowed, and they shouldn't be punished for earlier crimes. Although of course this is merely our perspective, and Earth humans are free to make their own choices. I suspect some people will dislike that idea. However, if you cheer on Hakann's journey, then why would you insist that a dark controller shouldn't be allowed to embark on a similar journey? Is it just because the dark controller hurt you while Hakann hurt people you don't know? Hakann has committed all the crimes that the dark controllers committed, and more. Now yes, obviously, the dark controller needs to genuinely repent, and not just say some nice words in order to trick people and then go on with their crimes. That is true. People shouldn't be naive about it. So, This is why at a high level of consciousness I think it's better to have either no or very, very few laws. Sure, you can find objections to our way of organizing society, however there are more problems with law-based systems, so long as your society is at a high level of consciousness. Of course, ultimately it's up to you how you want to organize your society. With all my love. Your star brother, Hakann.